Proverbs 2, 1 to 22. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. For he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse, who have left the straight paths to walk in dark ways, who delight in doing wrong, and rejoice in the perverseness of evil, whose paths are crooked, and who are devious in their ways. Wisdom will save you also from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words, who has left the partner of her youth and ignored the covenant she made before God. Surely her house leads down to death, and her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or retain the paths of life. Thus you will walk in the ways of the good and keep to the paths of the righteous. For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the unfaithful will be torn from it. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Sam and James, for serving us. It's good to say the Beatitudes. One of the things we say regularly together in church, I actually try and teach my kids that as well. Those words of Jesus at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount are just some of the words that I think he intended to just be with us always. And we're going to kind of stay with that theme this evening. So it's a good way to introduce it. I forgot to say in the announcements before, please do stay for soup afterwards. Good night for soup, I think. And there's some delicious ones up the back. If you can contribute a little to make that possible, please do. But especially if this is your first time, it's on us. Hope you'll be able to stay for a warm cup of soup. And a huge thank you to those who've made it. Once again, like blessing us in that way. I'm going to lead us in prayer, and then we'll talk about that passage and others. Let's pray. Lord, you give wisdom. From your mouth come knowledge and understanding. Please give it to us this evening, Lord, that we may serve you and know you. Amen. So I just want to begin this evening by kind of summarising the journey we've taken in the book of Proverbs to this point. If this is your first time with us, that's great, but you're coming in kind of halfway through a sermon series on the book of Proverbs, and so a recap may be useful. Also, because we've got a Q&A afterwards, there may be some questions that relate to that. So what have we done in the book of Proverbs so far? Well, we started with the idea of wisdom and the way, that's related to just the desire to live our lives well, right? When the Bible talks about wisdom, it's partly talking about how do you live your life in a way that works, and all the ordinary ways in which we're called to that in everyday life. Parents, teachers, society as a whole, all of them call us in a range of ways towards wisdom. And we also saw that the book of Proverbs actually pictures this in a really interesting way. It pictures it as actually wisdom itself, or even wisdom herself, calling to us. Wisdom calls in the book of Proverbs. And we also saw that according to Proverbs, there's a really good reason for that image. The reason is that wisdom is something real. Wisdom is something, in a sense, outside of us. It's not just something in the human brain. Wisdom calls because wisdom is something that in a way is like in the world. We encounter wisdom. We have to reckon with wisdom because this is a world that God made by wisdom, so that wisdom is really there calling to us. At the beginning, when God made the world, he had wisdom with him so that this became a world that is hospitable to human life. That's a picture you get in Proverbs, and it's full of interesting kind of importance for how we see the world. But we also saw last week, just continuing the journey, that although wisdom calls, we don't always listen to that call. Indeed, in many ways, we reject it. Proverbs actually asks us to be pretty honest about the fact that we don't always listen to wisdom. Wisdom's first speech in the book is a speech of frustration and judgment. And last week we needed to confront the fact that actually, in many ways, we make foolish choices. But that is a thought, as I said last week, that will lead you to Jesus. Because Jesus was the truly wise man who came among us perfectly, beautifully, and then became a fool, died the death of a fool for our sake. And the reason he did that was actually to open up again the possibility of wisdom. Jesus kind of gave wisdom back to us by going to a fool's death for our sake. If you missed last week's sermon, can I just encourage you to catch up on the podcast? It's kind of an important one in this series, and without it, I think the series could lack a bit of kind of gospel in it, although I'll keep mentioning that. But what we ended last week saying was that Jesus gives back to us the possibility of living wisely. He forgives our sins, and he forgives our foolishness, and because he took the dark wandering path all the way to Sheol, the place of the dead mentioned in the reading, that we were stuck on so that he could pull us back to the paths of life. And now he sets before us the chance to follow him again on the ways of wisdom, to come after him and learn wisdom once again. I think that's really good news, not just for us, but for our world. And now, therefore, we need to ask, what next? Like, how does that work? How do we do that? How do we get on with that new life that Jesus has called us to? How do we embrace and learn to walk the path that Jesus has opened up again? Now, I think it'd be useful at this point to just address a possible challenge, because it would be possible at this point to say, I mean, that is good news, but why do we need Proverbs anymore? Right? If Jesus gives us back the possibility of wisdom, can't we just stick with Jesus? And to a certain extent, I think that's a good point. There are things worse than just sticking with Jesus. I mean, if I've always put on a desert island and some weirdo said you can only have one book of the Bible, it's either Matthew's Gospel or the book of Proverbs, I'd pick Matthew's Gospel. Like, it is actually more important, right? But that's not happening. And you're not on a desert island and you don't have to choose. And so actually we ¿por qué no los dos? We can have both. And that's good, because to understand Jesus right, you have to understand him in the light of the Old Testament. To really get to grips with him, we have to know him as an Old Testament person, and a person who was soaked in and whose whole life flowed out of the Old Testament. And that includes the book of Proverbs. And so in this talk this evening, I really just want to do two things. First, I want to talk about this point, that Jesus was a wisdom teacher, and I want to kind of get us to grasp that for a second. And then I want us to begin letting that take us back to the book of Proverbs. And we're going to think about one aspect of how we can learn from Proverbs to follow Jesus, and that's hearing and doing. So that's the outline that's on your sheets. Proverbs 2 is also there. But we're going to begin by talking about Jesus, the wisdom teacher. So I did some further study on the book of Proverbs a while ago, a few years of it, and when I went to do that, a friend of mine from this church, who I really respect, he was a bit skeptical. And he observed that the New Testament hardly quotes from the book of Proverbs, and he kind of wondered whether Jesus was really that keen on this book. And he kind of subtly suggested that maybe, this is maybe not the best use of your time, Andrew. Fair enough. He actually did have a point, right? It's true that Proverbs is nowhere near as central in the New Testament as, say, the Psalms or the book of Isaiah. It also is not the heart of the Old Testament, right? But we shouldn't overstate this point. My friend's argument actually underestimates the significance of Proverbs, particularly for the teaching of Jesus. Jesus was actually a wisdom teacher. He would have been recognised as such. The historian Richard Bauckham reckons that Jesus would have been recognised as a sage, a wise man. And actually the Gospels kind of reflect this. They record Jesus talking about wisdom. At one point, he answers his critics by talking about wisdom, and he says, wisdom is proved right by all her children. He's kind of this veiled reference to his own work. At another point, he talks about the wisdom of Solomon, and he says, something greater than Solomon is here. Don't worry if you didn't catch all of that, it's fine. Just, read Luke's Gospel someday. But the style of Jesus' teaching is also often like that of the wisdom traditions. It's peppered with proverbial sayings and parables. And some of his teachings are drawn from Proverbs more than people realise. Here's an example. Lots of words about to come on the screen, don't freak out. In Luke 14, Jesus sees people choosing their seats at a dinner table, right? Very familiar situation. And then he says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honour, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited and you might end up getting sent down. And it's this little parable about being honoured and dishonoured. What people don't realise is that parable is almost certainly drawn out of Proverbs 25, which says, it's better for you for him to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before his nobles. I think actually Jesus built this parable from that proverb. Now, just an interesting example, but the clearest example of Jesus' use of Proverbs is also the most important. It's this passage at the very end of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount. You may know this passage, you may not. It doesn't matter if you do or you don't, but it's like in some children's books and stuff. But here it is, let me read it. Matthew 7, Jesus says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now, when Jesus is using the language of wisdom and foolishness, that already takes us into the world of the wisdom literature and Proverbs. You probably noticed that, right? It's interesting that he's using this language of wisdom and folly. What you may not have realized is that all the images in this little saying, in this little example, are drawn from Proverbs. Building a house in the book of Proverbs is like the archetypal wise act. By wisdom a house is built, Proverbs 24 says. By understanding it is established. Or Proverbs 14, the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands. So you've got these two, in Jesus saying, two wise men, building a house, one's coming down. That's the world of Proverbs. And also the image of the storm is from Proverbs. When the storm comes, Proverbs 10, the wicked are no more, but the foundation of the righteous endures. The wicked are overthrown and come to nothing, but the house of the righteous stands. Isn't that a striking one, that last one? That's where Jesus is getting this imagery from. And I think this is really important, right? At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus frames his teaching in terms of wisdom, and it means that he had come to offer the same promise as the book of Proverbs, the promise of wisdom. He was a wisdom teacher, deeply shaped by these traditions. And so one of the reasons to read the book of Proverbs then is simply to follow our master, to get to know him better. That's good, right? But more than this, as we read this book that shaped his teaching, we can also be helped to understand that teaching better. Proverbs can deepen our understanding of some of the themes he addressed. And that's where we're going now. And actually, within the New Testament, there is actually another book in which we see this already taking place. The letter of James, who was the brother of Jesus and his disciple in the end. James was also schooled in the wisdom traditions. It shapes his writing in all sorts of ways, and he's also shaped by Jesus. Here's a great example at the beginning of James. I know there's lots of words on the screen. Just stay with it. I'm moving fast. James writes in chapter 1, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness of God that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." I think what's wonderful about this is the way James is combining ideas from the book of Proverbs, actually, and Christian ideas. That mention of quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, those three ideas, they're three of the key themes of Proverbs. But James has combined them here with a really deeply Christian idea, the word that can save you. This is James, a disciple of Jesus, showing us how to read the book of Proverbs as Christians. And for that reason, over the next 3 weeks, those three ideas, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, will set the agenda. They're the next kind of the topics for the next 3 sermons. And I just wanted to introduce that now. But what I want to do for the remainder of our time now is pick up one other theme that James picks up from both Proverbs and Jesus, the theme that is at the center of what Jesus said there at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. The theme of not only hearing, but doing, putting into practice. Remember what Jesus said, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. And the foolish person is the person who hears the word and doesn't do anything about it." Hearing and doing. James emphasizes this as well. I won't read all of this, but just after the passage we read, he says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." That's the path of wisdom, hearing and doing. Be doers of the word, not just hearers. That is the way of wisdom. How do we do that? How do we make sure we don't just listen, but we put into practice as well? How do you make sure you're not a person who just hears these ideas and it doesn't change the way you live? It's easy to think that at this point, there's not really anything more to say, right? There are no other ideas needed. What you need is just the will to do it, right? I've heard the word, I've just got to get on and do it. And there's a truth in that, but it's not actually all there is to say. And the reason for that is it underestimates the time gap between when we hear the word and when we are required to act on it. Right? The person who hears a sermon about not stealing is probably not at that very moment engaging in, fraudulent trading on their phone. But if you are doing that now, you should stop. That's a simple sermon. Don't do that. It's stealing, right? But normally it's, at least Wednesday before that's happening, right? There's a time gap. And that time gap is dangerous. That space that intervenes between our hearing of the word and our need to act on it. And James understood this. That's why he goes on to say here that's why he goes on here to talk about forgetting. He says there that to listen to the word but not do what it says is like looking at your face in a mirror and then going away and immediately forgetting what you look like. That's the danger. The danger is forgetting, right? The danger is that the word we hear, it doesn't stay with us. It doesn't stay with us in a way that actually allows us to do things differently. Now, James makes it seem silly, right? And it would be silly to look in a mirror, but actually if we stop and think about it, we all know this is possible. I wonder if you know what this is like, to hear something that you know is wise, to hear something you know you ought to change, and then just to not be able to keep it with you powerfully, loudly enough that it makes a difference. Do you know what that's like? What we need to do instead, James says, is to continue in the Word. This is how he puts it, but whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom, he means there basically that the teaching that goes with the good news of Jesus, and continues in it. Notice that, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. We have to learn to be people. If we want to be not just hearers but doers, we have to learn to be people who continue in the teaching that we hear, who don't forget it. How do you do that? How do you do that? What does that mean? Well, here is one of the places I think the book of Proverbs can really help us, because this is actually one of the big themes of the opening chapters, and we're now finally getting to our reading. So in the opening chapters of Proverbs, we see over and over again a call to pay attention to remember the good words again and again. If you look at just the first verses of chapters 1 to 9, you'll see this over and over. Parents calling their children to pay attention, to listen, to not forget what they're saying. And this is because the book of Proverbs, it sees the danger that James sees of forgetting. But it also, and this is really interesting for us, it adds some detail. It sees that this danger of forgetting is dangerous because we live our lives amidst temptation. We live our lives surrounded by things that can pull us astray, that can take us off the path. This is how Proverbs begins. The book begins with parents trying to pull their child away from the temptation of easy money. That's really going to be destructive. We see it also in our reading from Proverbs chapter 2. Have a look at it there. It's printed in your sheets. I'm not going to read it all again. I think it's a wonderful chapter. The whole chapter is actually one long poem in the original. One sentence, actually. An amazing kind of piece of Hebrew writing. But notice the way the poem begins by describing the benefits of treasuring wisdom, guarding it, seeking it, longing for it, keeping it close. There's a kind of progression in the poem. Did you notice? It begins with accepting that these words you're being given are good words, verses 1 and 2. And that leads then to a desire to know more, calling out to wisdom, crying aloud, looking, searching, verses 3 and 4. And this leads to understanding. The Lord gives wisdom, verse 6. And this is how he gives it, by our seeking it and clinging to it. And in the end, this person who's seeking, they find themselves becoming a wise person. Have a look at verse 10. They reach a kind of intimacy with wisdom. I'll read it again, verse 10. For wisdom your heart to your soul, discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Those first 10 verses would be beautiful ones to remember. Have a look at those verses. Wouldn't you love to be that kind of person? Somebody for whom the paths of wisdom are so well known, so familiar that they are like a dear friend, and you are not going to leave them. Wouldn't you love to be someone who doesn't want what is foolish and evil anymore, but who just spontaneously loves what is good? That's what Jesus was like. Wouldn't you love to be more like that? The things that grab your heart are things that are good. And that will protect you, the poem says. It will protect you and guard you from what? From what? Well, that's what comes next in this chapter, in chapter 2. In verse 12, wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse. So bad words. Notice the role of words. Speech is critical here. The same is there again in verse 16. The most dangerous thing about this strange woman, it's translated adulteress, but it's just strange in the original. The most dangerous thing is her seductive words, her smooth words. Now that little section there about the strange woman and the temptation of adultery, even though it's a bit uncomfortable, we need to stay with it because it's a theme that the book of Proverbs comes back to a number of times. This temptation of adultery is the focus of 3 major sections. Now, in each case, it's always a man being tempted by a woman, okay? And that's, you can ask a question about that later if you want, but there's a few reasons it's like this. One is just that the original audience of this book was young men, and this was a big danger for them. The main object of criticism here is not really the woman, although that's implied, but it's mainly the man who makes this dumb decision. We'll come back to this. But a second reason this example is there is the memory of Solomon. I talked about this last week, but Solomon in the end went astray because he was drawn towards too many women. I mean, it's a pretty bad story, to be honest, and you read it in 2 Kings. But there is another reason, I think, that makes these moments still really interesting for us. Adultery is also in focus because somehow it highlights the key issues. It highlights the crucial dynamics of temptation. It shows you these moments, how it happens that somebody can be a hearer of the word but not a doer. And so I want to just stay with one of these moments. We're going to go to chapter 7. I'm going to put it on the screen. I'm going to read through it. This chapter is kind of an extended example of what we have there in chapter 2, verses 16 to 18. So have a look. The chapter begins here with a father telling his son to pay attention, to keep his words, to not lose them. Like we've been talking about. My child, keep my words and store up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teachings as the apple of your eye. You know, the thing that you love most to look at, right? Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, that they may keep you from the loose woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. And then the father tells a story. For at the window of my house, I looked out through my lattice, and I saw among the simple ones, I observed among the youths, a young man without sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. Then a woman comes towards him, decked out like a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with impudent face says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I've paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you and to seek you eagerly, and I've found you. I've decked my couch with coverings, coloured spreads of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. I think in those days, like, that was super sexy, okay? And just putting all these spices in your bed. I find this off-putting, frankly, but, you know, let's just kind of imagine ourselves in this. She's talking about the cinnamon in the bed, and you're thinking, whoa, you know, that sounds amazing, okay? And then she goes on, come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love, for my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him, and he will not come home until full moon. And look at this. With much seductive speech, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. And right away he follows her and goes like an ox to the slaughter. or bounds like a stag towards a trap until an arrow pierces its entrails. He's like a bird rushing into a snare, not knowing it will cost him his life. And now, my children, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many are those she has laid low, and numerous are her victims. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. How has this young man come undone? What's the key to his disaster? It's not mainly her appearance. It's not the actual spices in the bed or whatever. It's her words. Look at verse 21. With many seductive words, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. It's her words which set before him a picture that goes into his heart, and it kindles his desire. He listens to her words rather than remembering the words of wisdom that his father taught him. Her words win, and he is undone. If we had time, we could see this same idea all over these chapters. And there is something important to pay attention to. You see, temptation works through words. Because words get to our desires. They promise us things. They promise us fulfillments they can't really offer, but they can promise. It's not the reality of this woman that catches him. It's the imagined future she holds out. It's the prospects that she sets before him. And we are bombarded by false promises and false prospects every day. Smooth words, seductive invitations, words that find desires that we didn't even know we had. Online, at work, at home, from the moment we wake up, we all now have devices that let these invitations come at us everywhere. People often assume that it is images that are our biggest problem, but I'm not sure that's true. Pornography and greedy consumption depend upon words just as much as images. They use words in headings and captions to lure people in. They activate the mind. They promise things that cannot be delivered. To use a trivial example, right, because I'm not just talking about one thing, right? This is kind of trivial and it's a bit embarrassing, so I can share it. This week, I bought a grey shirt that I don't need. And I don't really know why I bought it. But I think it was because the caption was Fjord Loft shirt. And I thought, that's me. I'm a fjord kind of guy. Loft. You know, it had this name that for some weird reason connects with some aspiration to be Scandinavian or something. And would I have bought that if it was called grey shirt? You know, I would not. It's just a grey shirt, right? Words, and I give that to you as an example. You can put your own examples in. This is how temptation works. This is how a lot of marketing works, but it's also how it doesn't have to be kind of online. It can be the person at work who starts to persuade you of things. And their words just have a sweetness and they get at you. And they seem to hold out a prospect of something that you really want. And the problem is it's not enough. It's not enough to just assume that we know a better way, that we've made our decisions in advance. It's not enough to know in advance that those temptations are a mistake. Because what happens is what happens in the moment. Words can be very powerful in the moment. And the question is, what words are with you in the moment? Brothers and sisters, are you too confident in your ability to know what is right and to choose it in the moment? Are you overestimating your ability to resist seductive words? Do you really want to be a doer of the word and not just a hearer? If you do, then you need more than just to kind of know in theory what the right thing to do is. You need to have with you in the moment the words that will keep you on the good path. We need to have the words of wisdom. What does it say in chapter 7? Bound on our fingers, written on the tablets of our hearts. Would you make the same choices if the fingers that you used to type with had Jesus' words tied to them? None of us is perfect. A lot of this stuff might confront some people here with things they're really not proud of. And it's good as we finish just to kind of be taken back to the reality that Jesus means new chances, even for people who've really messed up. You may remember that one of the things that stood out to people and really annoyed people most about Jesus was that he hung out with tax collectors and sinners, including prostitutes. I think people were annoyed about that, partly because of passages like this, where the prostitutes, like your kind of image of a danger, and Jesus seems to be hanging out with them. What's he doing? Right? And tax collectors and prostitutes, like, in our day, maybe that's like scammers and OnlyFans stars, and Jesus is hanging out with them. And that's good news, because it's a reminder that whatever mistakes we've made, the death of Jesus and his grace is sufficient. And he does hold out a welcome to people like that to come and turn around and learn wisdom from him again. I hope you want to do that. And I hope you want to really learn it and to become a person who is a doer of the word and not just a hearer, a person who continues in what they've heard and doesn't forget it. That's why we spend all this time with the Bible. It's so that these words, the words of Jesus, our Saviour, in the moment, will sing sweetest and loudest and save us. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let it go. Guard it, for it is your life. Let me pray. Lord Jesus, we are actually really aware that we tend to go astray and that we're not real good at staying on the paths of wisdom. And many of us here will be aware of ways in which we've just not followed through on what we know we should do. Please, Lord, write your word on the tablets of our hearts, bind it into our minds, keep it close to us, Lord, so that we may follow you and not just hear your word, but act on it more and more. And we thank you that we can go to that project with confidence because of your forgiveness. And we thank you in your name. Amen. We're going to